Right. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just gonna record this thing. Yeah. Um, I think I would record a hell of a lot more music if I was constantly jamming with people. You know.
Yeah,
Uh, and I seriously admit that it's very hard sometimes to get motivated by yourself, which is why that like what I end up defaulting to is constant improvisation work.
yeah,
Because it's stuff that I don't have to feel quite so precious about. I don't have to work quite so hard on. But at the same time, you also work very hard on it because you work on it from a totally different angle. Um, and as I was saying in the last class, like I don't really make a definition difference between composition and improvisation. They're kind of to me they're the same thing, except
yeah.
the one you go back and correct your mistakes, so you change things for the better. So how's the study of your triads, your pentatonics, and your scales going?
Yeah, pretty good.
Yeah. So in this first one, I was planning to keep it pretty easy. This is essentially kind of a revision lesson because we're kind of talking pentatonic and those basic triads again, but we're looking at them from a slightly different angle.
Yeah,
Uh, we're looking at them as instead of thinking of them as a pentatonic, more as like extensions next to the triad, and why they might be um, where you might be using them. So the idea is if you take the extensions straight out of the pentatonic, then we're going to get ones that are going to work pretty much all the time against certain classes of chords. Where is everyone?
this is it. The bass one's only.
Oh, and it says there's 4 participants.
Yeah.
Ah, Christopher's got his mic off and Daniel's got his mic off. Come on, guys. Awesome.
Yeah.
Hey, man. All right, so to get going, Dave, I might actually put a bass together for next week if I can get an amp that'll be cooperative. So to get going, we want to start with having a look at our triads and turning those into pentatonics by thinking about the intervals between them. So the triad is going to be, all right, so second inversion, root inversion, first inversion. Can we all see that in the sheet? Can we all read it?
Wait, where's the sheet?
Sheet was sent out with the email.
Oh, true. I'll just look for that.
Yeah.
Right, found it. So, first, is this the first thing on it?
Yeah, I mean, look, I've written. Obviously, you've got the treble clef exercise above and the bass clef beneath. Just go straight to the bass clef. Like you guys are on the unfortunate burden that you guys got to learn to read bass clef and treble clef pretty competently, whereas guitarists, slack out and mostly focus on treble clef.
Yeah.
Which is going to become relevant because at the end of this lesson, we're going to talk about a melody, and the melody is often written out in treble clef. Okay, so to start the lesson, what I've been doing is starting on a drill. Couple of drills. The 2 drills we're going to take a look at today are going to be starting at 60 BPM. We're just going to do those inversions, going up and down the neck, like, right? I have messed up my layout here, so I can't see my metronome. There we go. 60 BPM, for some reason today, for me, feels very fast. So the plan here is if we can get you guys to mute your microphones, that way you guys can all play along with me and we don't have to hear everyone else's lag times. So just to revisit them, second inversion, root inversion, and first inversion. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, these kind of exercises I'd always recommend you do for a little while. I don't think that you get a lot of value out of them for doing 30 seconds. It does help you learn those, but the real learning kicks in when you try to do it for say 5 minutes. And you find out lots of interesting things about yourself, like that your hands can't take it. That at minute 3, things start getting sloppy, and it's all about the discipline of being able to keep focused on these kind of exercises. You also want to make sure that you're really focusing on the sounds. You want to be able to sing all of the notes you're playing, and you need them internalized. It's a good idea to think about them in different characters. Like I always think second inversion sounds really warm. Root inversion is kind of the basic one, right? And first inversion, that third in the bass always makes the chord kind of cloudy to me. You know, you put the most dissonant note in the bass and it kind of makes sense. Okay, we should also do this in minor. Hopefully we're all cool with the minor positions. I'll show you if you're not. All right, we take the third and we flatten it. Third's on the D string. Then we go up to our root inversion. Third's in the middle. And we flatten it. All right, then we go to the first inversion. Third's in the bass. We flatten it. All right. This is going to come up more and more and more. One of the things you must practice is knowing where your thirds are in the chords, where your fifths are in the chords. All right, the more you can think about that, the better. All right, same deal. We're just going to do minor. Those again. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, now if you're at all shaky on any of that, that's just revision from last semester. So, you know, bust it out into your practice and really note it out over the next fortnight. This stuff is like really fundamentally important. If you need any help with it, send me a text. You know the deal. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is take those major triads and turn them into pentatonic scale. So, you should know this from your pentatonic exercise last term. Here's our first C. I'm going to turn the metronome off for a second. And we're going to do this. Open 3, open 3, open 2. That's the tail end of box 4 pentatonic. Then we're going to go up to box 5 pentatonic, and it's going to go 3, 5, 3, 5, 2, 5. Then we're going to box 1 pentatonic and go 5, 8, 5, 7, 5, 7. Box 2, 8, 10, 7, 10, 7, 10. Box 3, 10, 12, 10, 12, 10, 12. The exercise here is going to be going up that as you climb the neck. So we're going to go. Sorry. Man, I'm having a day where I'm getting text messages flying in. I can't tell you how unbelievably distracting it is to look up and then have the screen completely occupied by something else. Okay, so at 60 beats a minute, we would probably be starting to practice that at eighth notes. I would recommend that you do all kinds of different subdivisions. You know, like if they got 6 notes here, eighth notes are pretty easy to do. Triplets would be easy to do. And 6 tuplets would be really easy to do. We could turn it into 4 notes, obviously, right? And do, you know, 16th very easy. Right? So what we're going to have a crack at is doing them up and down a couple of times, doing eighths. Eighths at this speed would be 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... sorry. Just up. Sorry, I got confused. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... on the top note. Alrighty, so with your mics on, who was actually able to keep up with all of that? Anybody?
I know.
So, how'd you go on the triads? Let's start with that. Okay. You guys unmuted your mics yet?
The
Yeah.
triads were right.
Right.
Then the pentatonics were alright, but it was still just wigging me out in some parts. Like towards the end, I just kind of had a brain fart.
Yeah.
Just like yeah.
I don't know, Chris. I
No,
can't
Chris.
really hear you.
Can't hear you, Chris.
Yeah. Got the text loud and clear. So, if any of that was shaky, that means that your knowledge of these things is shaky. You really, really, really need to have it. This is not a complicated exercise if you know your scales. Hey, is that you, Chris? I heard like a little burble of a bass line. So it gives you a good idea about exercises you should pay more attention to. You know, this is one where we're actually having a look at the whole neck kind of horizontally.
Yo.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
There we go. For some reason, it wasn't on microphone. I don't know why.
Yeah, you know, there's all kinds of technical difficulties that seep in with this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So how'd you go, Chris? You good with all that stuff, or?
I guess I just need to transition up through the through the shapes and back down. I think
Yeah.
I know the shapes. It's just memorizing them, I guess, and connecting them with the inversions.
Yeah. Yeah, clearly there's some works that's needed here. This is also a pretty slow speed. Like I personally would practice this faster. So it's definitely, if you struggled with it, it's definitely something you really, really, really want to check in. This is kind of like basic neck knowledge stuff. All right, so moving on into the actual body of the lesson. If we have a look at the sheet, up the very top, we have my favorite tetrachord diagram. Learn to love it, learn to be obsessive about it. It's super handy, especially as what we're going to talk about now is taking our triads and building them into a pentatonic scale. So if we take our first triad here, the first one on the neck, which is the second inversion, 3-3-2. We know that a pentatonic scale adds the 2 and the 6. So we need to have an idea of where to find 2 and 6. Generally, the easiest way of finding where 2 and 6 is, well, 2 is a tone above 1 and 6 is a tone above 5. So on this chord here, we a tone above 5, that we got 5 in the bass, right? Always make sure that you know which note is note in the triad. 5 in the bass, we go a tone up. All right, that's our 6. Here's our root. Second inversion root's in the middle. Go a tone up. That's our 9. 3. So that's a pentatonic scale. And related to this chord shape. Now, most of the time when I'm playing this chord, that is not the box I would think of. And this is one of the interesting things about guitars, basses included. There's lots of different ways of finding your way around this. So if we instead thought about this as the 6 being a minor third beneath the 1, and the 2 being a tone beneath the third, we would come up with this fingering. Right? 3, open, 3, open, 2. And they're exactly the same notes. What you will find, though, is that the lines and which fingers you use are going to suggest different ideas to you. So you've got to explore both. You've got to see what's good about one, what's good about the other. Okay, coming up to the root inversion. This one is a little bit more straight ahead, right? In root inversion here, we could do, we're going to do that, the transition by stepping up a string and back 3 frets. That's a way of doing a tone on the bass or the guitar. Anything that's in fourths, really. Instead of going a tone up, because if we do a tone up, it'll be this. Right, there's our fifth, so we're going to tone up together 6. So 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. Now that's a little awkward, especially on a bass where the stretch is even bigger. Doesn't mean you wouldn't do it. Like you might do something like with a slide or something. Could be cool. There's no such thing as a bad idea. Just different ways of using it, different music that comes out. All right, but a more convenient one is probably to do a tone by up a string and back 3 frets. So we get 1, 2, 3, triad note, 5, 6. Okay, coming up to the first inversion. All right, thirds in the bass. And here we have here we have the fifth and the root. So fifth up a tone to the 6th, root up a tone to the 9, to 2. And that's a nice pentatonic box that's associated with that. All right. The whole time you're doing this, you want to make sure that you are noting where the 6 and the 9 is. All right. 6 and the 9 are really great, easy extensions to play on any plain major chord. By plain major, I'm doing the jazz thing right now where I'm going to divide chords up into 3 different families. We've got major chords, minor chords, and dominant chords. There can be this slight annoying thing. I don't know if you've ever listened to jazz players talk where they're actually playing something like this. And they go, oh, it's A-dom, A7. And it's clearly not. This is not an A7. This is an A11. But a lot of people wouldn't even differentiate between the two of them. Functionally, they do the same thing. It's just one's got more spice in it. So a lot of the time, they just simplify their thing. And, I'm doing a minor chord to a major chord to a dominant chord, Minor chord, major chord, dominant chord. All right, and when they say minor chord, they didn't tell you they're playing minor 7. When you're playing major, they didn't tell you they're playing a major 9. And when they're doing the dominant, they're not telling you it's doing augmented. It's just that they have blocked all chords into these groups, and each of these groups have kind of special rules. And the simple one to start with is that on a major chord, the 6 and the 9 are really nice, almost bland extensions. Like they're extensions that just sit nicely with the chord. They don't add a lot of dissonance. And because they don't add a lot of dissonance, they're not bad ones for bass players to play around with. There is a thing on bass that I'm sure you've all found, which is that extensions in chords, or even sometimes just triads, can sound super woolly. And it's a physical thing. It's because of the pitch and how slowly a bass waveform moves. You know, we are more capable, we have much more accurate hearing in extreme upper registers. You know, our hearing from like 2 kilohertz to 20 kilohertz is far more accurate than it is beneath that. And not only that, but because the waveform is moving so fast, the small amounts of cancellation that we get that causes dissonance are more acceptable. You know, like this kind of sound. You know, that's E flat against E. It's more acceptable there than it is here or here. I mean, that's better because it's separated by an octave. I can't actually go to the next octave down. But if you guys try it on your instruments where you've got a bass in your hands, when you play that semitone dissonance, the lower and lower you get, the more it kind of feels like a brown tone's about to start happening. This real warble, and it becomes less and less pleasant. But the more you push it up into the upper octaves, the more pleasant it becomes. And for us as bass players, that's a really important thing to remember, is that the distance between your intervals can clean them up. So for you guys, triads like this, I have included them here because they're really fundamental in understanding. They're really good for building bass lines, but they don't necessarily sound great played as block chords like what we've been practicing. They can sound quite muddy. So quite often on a bass, what you would do instead is separate parts of them by, say, an octave. Do what's called spread triads, right? So what I'm doing here is I'm doing a G chord. I'm doing the root, then the fifth, and then the third up an octave. Spread triad voicings sound cool on a bass. Yeah. Now, one of the other things that we could do, if we think about bass lines dyadically, you know, so just out of 2 notes instead of 3, this gap sounds quite cool when you start doing a 10th. A 10th is just a third separated by an octave. And it can be quite a fun way of playing around with certain concepts. Like if we do this octave and we add a 2, a 9, that's quite a cool extension to add on a bass too. It's much less dissonant than any kind of 7. And the third. All right. So sometimes it's worth playing around with some extensions up in this second octave. All right. What generally is not going to sound great on a bass is something like a major 7th. The clash that actually isn't too bad here on a guitar, on a bass, is going to get very, very clashy. It wouldn't if you were able to throw that 7th up another octave, right? So if you played, say, your G string here, major 7th, an E chord, E flat, and the low E, that's going to be much more pleasant because it's separated by 2 octaves rather than just 1. Which starts to tell you some things about how you're going to plan out how you use some of these extensions. You probably want, if you're going to introduce an extension into your bass lines, something that you're going to hold on to or something that you want to use as a color tone, you probably want to bump that into an octave above whatever the bass note is, whatever the actual bass note is. And it's a great way of experimenting around with how to explore extra tones, something on basses that you probably haven't done a lot, like bass lines that use 2 notes at a time. You know, you can also start using it to kind of make your own chord changes and progressions out of self-accompanying. Or if, say, you're playing with a lead guitarist and there's just the 2 of you, or you're in a power trio kind of setup, you might start playing dyads because it fattens it up while the guitarist is dropping out to do his solo. Because I don't know if you've ever been in that kind of situation, but when the guitarist drops out to solo and the bass is just sitting on the same thing that it was doing before, it feels like the energy falls out of the performance. No matter how good that solo is, it really kind of drags the whole thing down because the soundscape has narrowed so much. You know, what we were used to hearing was a lead instrument, someone's voice, and a guitar, and a bass and drums. And now what we're hearing is a lead instrument, the guitar, and just bass and drums. So it's a great opportunity for you guys to think about, how can I fatten my sound out? How can I take up more of the harmonic space to make it feel bigger so that way the solo is properly supported? Right? Interestingly, quite often for bass solos, the guitarist has to do the opposite thing. He's got to think about how I can play less so we can hear more of the bass. And for that, I would choose quite often as a guitarist to use extensions. The bass players are often really good at still playing solos that root the chords properly. So as a guitarist, I'm like, cool, I'll play like extensions that I couldn't get away with earlier in the song because they're still grounding the chord. Okay. Do we go? Yes, we go through all three of those, adding in the pentatonic notes. So now let's do them as arpeggios. So here we're starting in the root position. Now this is an opportunity. I kind of keep driving this home. Something you need to do to strengthen your reading is to combine your theory information. Yep. When I learned to read, it was this weird paint by numbers approach, and no one ever told me that, like, if I'm in the key of F and you already know F scales all over the neck, then the first thing you should do is look at the key scale and go, I'm in the key of F, so I'm going to use all of these notes. Right? Like, it seems really obvious, but man, it took me a long time to think of connecting that. So if we look at this first C6 arpeggio, we can see, look, it's a C root chord. C root is going to be there. It could also be here. The difference is semantic at this point. And then we're going to add the six. Well, the six on a C are A notes. Okay, well, there's an A note here, and there's an A note here. So what we're going to do is play this as an arpeggio. Now, I know you guys are going to do the bebop scale at some point. I can't remember if it was last semester or this semester. So what I've done is include this is a bebop rhythm arpeggio. So that's usually when we start on an upbeat, and then we do a triplet for the arpeggio and end on another upbeat. So it sounds like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Oh, sorry, I know this major, this is dominant seventh. Right? Now, what are we doing here? We are focusing in on the idea of the triad and where one extension is, the 6. All right? This is part of that map you're building, an association between here and this extension. Okay, we'll do the same thing in first inversion. Here we are in first inversion. A sixth, where do we find sixes? Sixes are a tone above the fifth. Find the fifth in the chord. Move it up a tone. All right. Nice kind of flavor that doesn't add a lot of flavor, if you know what I mean. So like if someone's playing a... Right? You can really kind of just mess around continually using that note over a plain major chord, and it gives you another option, another sound to add in that gives you somewhere to go. I think a lot of the job in bass is deciding about how much movement the background of the song feels like it has. You know, how much do I drive this? And in moments where you need a lot of notes to kind of push the song forward, this is a great place to start if what you're playing on is kind of primary colored chords. Okay, so that again. First inversion, C6 arpeggio. Coming down to our C second inversion. All right, well, we've got to find the 6. The 6 is an A. It can be found a tone above the 5th, or it could be found a minor third beneath the root. And in this instance, I'm going to go minor third beneath the root to start with. So we can get this. All right, we could do a tone above the 5th. And you need to, one, experiment with both fingerings, because you need to know both of those fingerings. As you're improvising bass lines, if you end up with your fingers in this position, you're definitely going to use this one. If you have your fingers back here, you're definitely going to use the other one. So you need to know multiple paths through all of these things, thinking about them more as distances away from my triad. Okay, onto the add 9s. Yet again, add 9. you know, any budget singer who's, you know, done the first 2 years of guitar and has decided to stop at doing the open chords can tell you the add 9 is the one you hit all the time. In fact, I worked with a singer for a while who would always play add 9 on a C chord because she just didn't like playing a real C. That kind of laziness gets very annoying after a while because there are plenty of places where if you add the add 9 and you're making this all sparkly, it probably should have just been a plain C. But it does work most of the time. So here we are. How do we find the 9? Well, the 9 is a 2. Could be found a tone above the root. That's quite a big stretch on a bass. If I was doing that, I'd probably do something more like this. Find the 5th on the A string, just from the stretch limitations. But I quite like the feeling of my hand opening like that. So quite often on bass too, I do lots of really big stretches. Other way of finding the 2, remember that we could go up a string and back 3 frets. That's a way of getting a tone on these instruments. So now this should sound pretty familiar. It's kind of like a country walk-in. Right? It's a cliche lick that's in hundreds of styles. Definitely something that's worth paying attention to. Okay, then we go to our first inversion. So we've got to find the root. We're going to do a root tone up in this one. Here's the root. Go a tone up. Whenever you take any of these little exercises, the reason I've just written out the 4 notes is that that's the easiest place to find them, the easiest place to understand them. You should constantly work at improvising with them. What kind of lines can you come up with just those 4 notes that sound cool? Can you come up with some that transfer between the 2 positions? Right? Okay, and coming down to second inversion, finding the root and upper tone again. That's a famous introduction of a classical piece of music. Yeah, I would also say it's a good idea to try to come up with personalities for inversions. For me, second inversion sounds really warm. You know, whereas a root inversion is kind of bland is the wrong word, but it's the predictable one. It's the one that I don't even really have a character for. It's just like what a C chord sounds like. If I want to take a C chord and I want to warm it up, that second inversion is a great way of making it sound real cozy. Whereas the first inversion is a way of making it almost sound a little troubled. Having an E in the bass of a C chord. It's dramatic, it's a little cloudy, and it's a little more conflicted than, say, the warmth of the 5th in the bass or the cleanliness of a root in the bass. You don't have to use these analogies, but I would suggest that you come up with some of your own. The more that you can describe music to yourself, the easier it is going to be for you to access these sounds when you're composing or improvising or working on an arrangement. Yeah? It's very easy to think at this point, oh, like, you know, the lyrics are kind of simmering down and it's the romantic moment where the couple is talking to each other. Well, maybe using second inversion is going to make that feel cozy. All right. And then maybe if I then don't use second inversion for one of the verses, it will change the feel of what that verse is doing. If there's a verse that is cozy and there's one that's kind of troublesome, like one where you're talking about how nice it is to sit by the fire together, and the next one is talking about the argument you had just after sitting by the fire, you may, and the chord progression doesn't change, you may choose different bass notes to drive the dissonance in the argument and other ones to drive the sweetness in the nice part. All right? It's a lot of control that bass players get, and it's worth coming up with these kind of personalities and thinking about it. Okay, a little bit further down the page now. So C minor 7, C minor add 11. One of the mistakes I made, the first piece of instruction I got with extensions when I was a little kid, was that sevens, throw sevens in. You see a major chord, try a major 7 or try a dominant 7. You see a minor chord, do a dominant 7, and just keep trying them. And one thing that it took me a long time to realize is that if you take a minor chord and you make it minor 7, You soften it. You actually remove some of the minor from the minor chord in a way. And why is that? Well, it's because you're making it more like a major chord. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of a jazz instructor, a really famous guy called Barry Harris. If you don't, you should look him up. His view on music theory is fascinating. But he doesn't even kind of believe in minor seventh chords. He doesn't believe in treating them as something separate. He calls them an inverted major six. So one thing to bear in mind is if you're going to add a seven, a flat seven, compositionally to a minor chord, you're softening it. You're making it less minor, less dramatic, less sad, more like a major chord. All right. There are plenty of instances where you want to do that. Like if you think of a song like, I don't know, I think it's Easy Like Sunday Morning, where it's like just 1, 2, 3. Having full minor chords there it's actually a little bit more dramatic. Playing minor is more dramatic than this. What is really interesting is if we took the extensions from the major, if we play the 6 and the 9 on the minor, they are extremely dramatic and dissonant. Here's minor 9. All right, now you tell me it doesn't sound like tragedy. All right, and it's the same with minor 6. They are conflicted sounding chords. So let's take our root inversion triad. We want to add in the minor 7. So the minor 7 is going to be found a tone and a half above the 5th, or a tone beneath the root. So we could do one of those bebop arpeggios here. 7, triad, 7. We do it up in first inversion. Again, minor third above the root is probably the easiest one to do. All right, and you could combine the arpeggios too. All right, so I went up the minor 7, added the 9 to come down. You get some cool sounds. Okay, second inversion in minor. Here it's going to be a lot easier to, in this fingering at least, to add the Dom 7 a tone beneath the root, so it's going to be. Alternatively, yeah, we could finger it that way if we want to just put it on 2 strings, moving the third, sorry, the third over to the A string. All right, at 11, we want to think about the 4. The 4 is going to be a tone above the minor third. It's going to be a semitone above the major third, but a tone above the minor third. Here's root. There's our 4. Okay, we take it up to our first inversion. All right. Here's 3. Here would be 4. So we might do something where I went up with the 4, came down with the 7. And that's an interesting one because it's going to work against most minor chords, right? These are the easy extensions to use. So it's going to work well against pretty much most of them. Okay, and down to the minor, second inversion. Easiest place here is a tone above the third. All right. Obviously, these are some things that you need to practice, and you need to practice thinking about them in these terms. These are not things that you just want to memorize. You don't want to memorize the shapes necessarily. You want to think how to construct the shape from the triad. That way, you're converting yourself to be thinking more and more and more about chord tones and about intervals, rather than fingering shapes. I know that the whole first semester was fingering shapes, whereas what we're trying to do here is take that knowledge, which if you are shaky on them, you still need to practice them as shapes, but you also need to include thinking about them in a different way, thinking about them as rooted from a chord. All right, so the last little bit of this lesson, building lines, all right? Now this is some basic ideas about lines, right? Lines are a way of connecting two chords together. You could do that all with chord tones, where you do chord tones for one bar, then chord tones for the next bar. And there are some kind of basic rules that we can follow. So resolutions usually occur on the beat. It's really weird if we resolve to a chord on an off beat, or if we resolve to the chord on the second beat of a bar instead of the first beat of a bar. Or even worse than that, if we resolve to a chord on beat 4 and. If we resolve just before the bar changes over, that's usually quite weird sounding. Ones and fives are the most solid resolutions, but 3 gives the chords basic color. All right, so if you're always resolving on ones and fives, then all you are doing is outlining the solid tones of the chord. The 3 is going to tell you whether or not that chord is happy or sad. Now, for a bass player, the third in the bass is going to be a special sound. You probably want to include, if you're going to include your third, you probably want to include it an octave above the root. Notes outside the triad are often used as connection between triad notes. So with these things in mind, let's take a look at this melody. All right, everyone can unmute their mic now. This is definitely a conversational part. So, anyone want to analyze the anacrusis for me? How does the anacrusis relate to this concept of using triads, of using scale tones?
Wait, which melody is this?
So at the bottom of the page, it says the nearness of you. Hoagie Carmichael.
Right.
Right. I can do the first one if you like, and we can trade rounds doing the rest of them. Or if you've got an idea, let me hear it.
Wait, what was the question that you asked, sir?
So how does the melody here relate to these triad rules? Where are they using triad notes? Where are they using notes that aren't the triad? Are there any predictable rules that we can see? I'll do the anacrusis in the first bar for you, so you can kind of get a feel for what's going on here. If we look at the anacrusis, anacrusis, by the way, almost always goes 5-1. I don't know if you ever noticed that. It's ba 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 ba, right? There's always this do up. We're trying to introduce the first bar of music.
All right.
And here we have C, F, G. Well, C, F, that is the 5 and the 1 from the F chord. But why G? That's a sus2. Can we think of any reason why we hit the G at that point? Instead of completing the arpeggio, like the arpeggio would be F, C, A, right?
Does it like act as a sort of, I don't know, like, because it starts the next note on an A, so like a leading tone almost, or not a leading tone, but like kind of walks the next.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It creates tension that makes that A work. This is that sin I was talking about before. If we resolve to the A before the start of the bar, we soften that note entirely. It then kind of sounds dodgy. Sorry, we're doing the key. It's not the pale moon that it's like, oh, really? So putting that G in there means that we avoid the tone we are aiming for. This is a really important idea. We are building up to pale, that A note. And if we preempt it in the previous bar, or especially in the previous beat, it's going to sound really off because we've kind of thrown away the surprise. But by using a G, a scale note, not technically a chord note, it's part of a sus triad, so it's the 2. By using that G, we create tension that then makes the resolution feel better. Right? Essentially, the dude writing this melody looks at it and goes, well, I could start with an F triad, but like I really want to be on A. So what's the note in between F and A that I can use? Well, G. Right? And that creates a nice walk in. Linear motion, so stepwise motion is always good. I don't know, I'm sure you guys have figured this out, but like if we have a chord progression that goes between, say, C and F here, we can cover all the ground in between. So, we could go like C, C, D minor, E minor, F. Because building up stepwise motion through a scale is always fine. Right, having a look at bar 1, we can see here we get A, C, B flat, A. Well, the majority of those are F, A, and C. They're just chord tones. The B flat is really interesting here. It's the 4. And we see that the 4, which creates a hell of a lot of tension, resolves immediately to the 3rd. This is actually not a bad kind of beginner's rule. It's not always true, but when you play the 4, you better play the 3rd after it, just for now. That's a movement that is kind of compulsory. A lot of the time, if you are just jamming along and improvising, if you hit that 4 and don't go back down again, it's going to sound off. The 4's job is kind of to create tension that moves us to the 3rd. Now, if we continue into the first beat of the next bar, we see that G against the C minor 7. Well, G is the 5th. 1s and 5s are solid resolutions, remember? Just like the 5th that we had, the 3rd. So the 3rd was the color tone that we started the melody on, pale. And now we're doing the 5th for sights. Excites me. Using the 3rd here might have made sights too noticeable. And the 5th is actually a good choice at this moment, especially as we're on the second syllable of a word. But after that, we go to B flat. Now, B flat is for the second beat of C and the first beat of F. Now, B flat against the C is the minor 7th. Well, we're playing a C minor 7 at this point, so that's a chord tone. That's nice. It's one of the extensions, but it's a chord tone. And then we go to F7. Well, F7, a B flat is a suspended 4th note. Well, the rules state, the rule that we've talked about says that the next note we hear, if we're hanging a 4th, is probably the 3rd. Let's check it out. That is an A, which is the 3rd of that chord. So we are doing that 4-3 step. Okay, anyone want to do the next 2 bars for me?
I'll do it if you want.
Yeah, sure. Let's hear it, Ethan.
You go with B flat major 7, and it starts on an A. So
sorry, you're reading bass clef. It's treble stuff in F.
Feck. That's twice. Sorry. I guess it's on an F of that B flat diminished.
Sorry.
Major 7.
We're major 7. So F in a B flat major 7 is which note?
The 5th.
5th. Great.
So from the 5th, then we go to A.
Yep. A in a B flat major 7.
That'd be the major 7th.
Major 7th. But in this instance, it's a chord tone because the major 7th is what's prescribed for you to play underneath it.
Yep.
So it's a good option. Okay. And the last note?
The G.
G. What is G to a B flat major 7? Or what is G to a B flat major chord?
The major 6.
The major 6. Now, we've talked a lot today about how the major 6 is kind of a fine note to throw in. It is an extension. There's also a reason we're going to use it. Can you think of a reason about why we might use that G to do with the next chord?
Walk to the next, like to the flat 5th. It's
Yeah,
the minor 3rd of the flat 5th. Does it like highlight that it's going to be like that minor sort of tonality?
Well, it just goes together better. Like if we have that G, it is borrowing essentially a note from the next chord. And if we had have played one of the B flat major chords against this B flat diminished chord, so like if we used F in that instance, right? So we have thrills and delights, right? That kind of Phrygian sound, that flat 2 interchange where we're doing between, F and E. That's quite dramatic. Whereas doing this thirds thing actually means that we have essentially a kind of a part of an E minor. I was going to say it's the flat 7 and the 5th, etc. from the diminished chord. That's kind of pointless thinking about diminished chords that way. All of the chords are all the root, all of the chords are all the third, all of the notes are all the root, all of the notes are all the
If
third.
it was B flat diminished, if that's the chord, B flat diminished 7, like would that like have to actually be notated as like an F flat then? Or like the E, would that be notated as an F flat usually?
Oh, right. I would say often I haven't seen it notated that way.
Yeah.
And I think it would be confusing to notate it that way. And they're
Yeah.
probably going to just continue to sit in the, because this is a passing chord.
Yeah.
So yeah, you probably, technically, when you talk about the notes of a B flat diminished, it is probably more accurate to call the E an F flat. But I think it would just be confusing and not necessarily useful
Yeah.
on sheet music. Like sheet music, the majority of rules about sheet music is actually to make it easier to read. And quite often there will be moments that there are a couple of a couple of chords, I can't remember which ones they are, which are officially notated with both flats and sharps. And it's just purely because if you just tried to notate them all with flats, you'd end up with like quadruple flats or whatever in order to make them all line up alphabetically. And that's just not as easy as just reading something with both flats and sharps. I think there's only 2 official extensions that are legally allowed for that kind of thing. Okay, so if we have a look at, say, the last bar of that line, anyone want to talk me through it?
Of the B flat diminished 7.
Yeah, basically diminished 7.
So we start on like the flat 5 of the chord, and then we move to like the major 6 again of the chord.
Well, hold on. Interestingly,
it wouldn't. It would be it would be a diminished 7th. So it is a chord tone still.
Yeah, it's chord tones. I mean, it's one of the dumbest things about diminished chords that a 6 is called a double flat 7. Just so we can bend it into these rules. But you're right, yeah. So then we hit F.
And then is the F kind of like resolving it so it goes back to the A minor 7?
Yeah, we're gonna get this 4th movement, F C, right? The F is actually quite dissonant against the diminished chord. Right? So yeah, that F is a bit of a standout note. Now, it's the root of the key. The root of the key is probably almost always acceptable to throw in. But we're also doing another thing here called melodic mirroring.
Yeah.
Melodic sequencing, right? You might notice that there is an awful lot of building up to an A and coming back down to an F. You know, like the first bar, build up to an A, and then we start coming back down again before we then come back up to an A at the end of that bar and come down to an F. And then we go up to an A and we come back down again. And at the end of that bar, we're on an F. All right? So we are kind of using this general build up, fall down shape in the melody. And because that is predictable, right, it kind of guides our choices. Melodies should have repetitious elements, right? A melody that absolutely never repeats its rhythm, never repeats its notes, is essentially listening to freeform jazz. And a lot of people can't get with that, right? One thing it took me ages to learn about really, really, really kind of up its own asshole music, where it's like we are just really spent too much time studying, is that what you really need to do is pass a theory test in order to listen to it. If your ears are as good as those players and you're hearing all of the chords that should be going past, then hearing all of the weird stuff they're doing to the chords becomes this game of, oh, it should have been this, but you're doing this. How isn't that cute? Right? You start understanding the strategy of it because your ears are good enough. Most people don't like that kind of music because they are not trained and they can't follow it. And they're right. To them, it sounds like noise. You know, you need to have enough training in your belt that you can go, oh, I see what you're doing. Yeah, it's kind of fun. This is kind of like a chess game where you're strategizing how you're treating each of these chords and you're kind of musically playing with this idea. Right, so what are we supposed to take from this? We are supposed to take ideas on how to construct melodies. We could see how vital in a basic melody like this, triad tones are. We can see that a lot of the time, someone's going, hey, I'm on an F major 7, and my next chord is C minor. All right, well, I gotta have a strategy. I'm gonna play F major 7 for a while. And I wanna hit a note from C minor. Right? We are targeting chord tones. We are using things that are not chord tones strategically. We are using them to bridge gaps between chords. We're using them so that we can push the note we want to get on into the right place in the bar to make it feel good. These are the things that you need to focus on while you practice improvising, while you practice using your triads, and while you practice using your scales. All right? You want to make sure that you have these kind of ideas in mind. So maybe a good exercise is to take a really basic chord progression and think of 10 or 15 different ways you could connect those two notes, those two chords, and see if you can say, you might map it out so that you start with like, so I'm doing F to a C. Right, and then you find a path, right? Right? It's all about finding different connections between those two signposts. Now, obviously, the longer you're on a chord, or the better at this you get, you can have more and more and more and more signposts. But the thing to focus in on is the resolution between chords. Important target notes. That's what's going to turn your improv and your bass lines into things that sound immediately like music. Alrighty, guys. That's the end of this one. So anyone got any questions before we wrap it up? Got some ideas about what you're going to practice in the next fortnight too?
Yeah.
You.
Yeah.
Ah.
Cool, cool. All right, so I think in the next one, I'm probably going to start, I'll cover a different type, like I might cover more dramatic extensions, or I might cover dominant extensions. At least having the dominant extensions, if you have some major and some minor in the dominants, you could actually get your way through a jazz standard. You know, remember that you want to practice all of these things in multiple positions. Like if you're doing the C to F thing down here, you also want to do some kind of C to F thing here, and you also want to do some kind of C to F thing here. And the different positions on the neck are going to suggest different lines to you. So you can use the same target tones. Right? So you want to explore all of these different pathways. And this is what I think is much better scale and arpeggio practice, right? Hopefully you have got all of these things under your fingers enough that you don't have to think about them too hard. If you're not yet at that stage, you need to do much more drilling and just get the things under your hands. But as soon as you can, you want to practice over chord progressions. You want to practice making music, not practice running scales. Alrighty, guys, I'm going to have to start my next one. So any questions, anything you'd like to chat about, remember, shoot me up on email. You know, we could probably have a video chat or something if you want one. Just let me know where you're at.
Thank you. See ya.
No worries, guys. See you in 2 weeks.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Yeah, you too.